Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia Daf Ayin Bet. I'll just mention that number one, Din and Daf went up with Alana Stein-Hain Shiur on Heter Iska, so strongly recommended. And there's again the reason why we have all this extra content is to fill in the things that we don't necessarily have time to do during Daf, which is get to the background, the concepts behind number one, behind rebate, why rebate is forbidden. That was the first Shiur, and the second Shiur in the series was how, on what basis is Heter Iska built, and how do we do business today with, and avoid interest issues? Because as we see, interest is not just an issue of a loan on interest, but lots of business dealings could potentially have interest problems. We're going to also deal with that a lot in the second part of today's stuff. Also, Rabbanit, if you climb, had a really good shiur in B'machshava Shniya on the connection between rebate and Yirat Hashem. Remember in the pasuk it says you should fear God, what the connection between that is, and also again concepts behind issues that we've been grappling with. Also a shiur went up on Gefet, also about other concepts of rebate. Anyway, lots of extra content. Not that you have always time to do it, to listen, but these are extra content there to help you to fill in the picture of things we don't always get to do in the daf. Okay, also one last announcement or two announcements. I'll be in Manhattan next week, so that means there's no Zoom next week. So I will be in Manhattan on Wednesday night at 7 p.m. giving a shiur. So if anybody wants to join, ask for details or email UWS Upper West Side Hadran at gmail.com to register to come. Okay, with that, we're going to get started. So quick review of how we ended yesterday. We had these two cases, which were really four cases of a Gentile. We started with Chris lends money to Ruth, and then instead of Ruth paying the interest, Naomi comes along and says, oh, I'll take the loan. I'll pay you back the interest, Ruth, and you can give all the money to Chris. I'll basically take your interest off your hands, which we said she can't do unless it's in front of Chris. If it's in front of Chris, then it really becomes, and this is the big issue that we had to grapple with, it becomes like Chris is appointing Ruth to be his shaliach. It's really all about Chris's loan, not Ruth's loan. And that's why Ruth can kind of pass off the interest to Naomi. Naomi will pay Ruth again. Ruth pays just 100. And Naomi gives her the interest to pay back. And that's allowed, even though theoretically she's getting interest from Naomi, because if she does it in front of Chris, she becomes Chris's messenger, so to speak, in which case the loan is really between Chris and Naomi and not Ruth. And if it's the reverse, that Ruth loan money to Chris and Chris then passes it on to Naomi, then again, it becomes between Ruth and Naomi. And then it's forbidden, even if it's right, if it's done in front of Ruth, it's going to be forbidden because then Ruth is part of the picture. If it's done without Ruth in the picture, then Chris just gets the interest from Naomi, and that's totally fine because he's not Jewish. But if it's done in front of Ruth, it's actually a problem. Now, this all seems to be, and that created the big problem, that this is because in case number one, Chris is basically appointing Ruth to be his messenger. And in case number two, Ruth is appointing Chris to be her messenger. And that's why that one works and that one doesn't work. And on account of this, this basically creates a problem because we hold that there is no shlichut for Gentiles. So this is all based on shlichut with Gentiles, and that's a problem. I'm going to stop for a minute because I completely forgot after all those announcements, the dedication. So I'm going to say it right now. Thank you, Alana, for the reminder. Today's stuff is sponsored by Bruce and Yossi Pollack in honor of their daughter, Avital Adin Bat Mitzvah. We are so proud of your devotion to Torah, Mitzvot, and Maasim Tovim. Ima loves learning Mishna Yomi with you and can't wait to keep going for the next several years. Consistency, consistency, consistency. Mazal tov. Mazal tov, and apologies for getting to it late. Okay, so now that was our big problem. How can we have shlichut by nochrim? And even if you say in case number two, or really four, it was like second part of case two, in the last case, when Ruth makes Chris her messenger, maybe we'll say that works to forbid something, but to permit it, no way, no how. To which we say the first answer, and that's the only answer that's going to be accepted. We're going to have three answers, which are really four because two breaks into two parts. The first answer, I'm just doing a review of yesterday's stuff. The first answer was, it's when Chris takes the money physically from Ruth and passes it to Naomi, in which he's basically saying, Ruth, I'm taking you out of this. I'm done with you and me. And that's why it works. Okay, so even though Ruth in the end might get the rebate from Naomi, and Ruth didn't pay the rebate in the end, basically Chris is removing her by physically taking the money and passing it on. It's as if I got my money back from you, you're out of the picture. The second answer of Rav Ashi was to somehow say that there is shlichut for a Gentile. That either there's no shlichut only by truma. That can't be true though, because we know that truma is the paradigm for all shlichut. We learn everything about shlichut from that. Or the shlichut in the Torah is truma, which means a Jew can't appoint a Gentile, but maybe a Gentile can appoint a Jew, and that's case one. But also we reject that, and that's where we ended yesterday. Ravina Amar, end of Ayin Aleph Amabet, 3 lines from the bottom. Third answer, maybe it's just like a katan. A katan, we're going to read it right now and then you'll see. Katan la, and then I'll go back and explain the first words. Katan la pagavdi late shlichut elo zchia midrabanan. Hachanami lo shna. A child can't be a shaliach because a child doesn't have knowledge, but a child can acquire something. Why can a child acquire something? Because acquiring zchia can be done even not in your presence. As long as it's something good for someone, you can do something on someone else's behalf. And it can even be done for a katan, a minor. If it can be done for a minor, then it should be able to be done for a Gentile, because a minor is identical to a Gentile. No shlichut, and then yes, zechia. So you should be able to say that it works here. There's a bit of this problem with this word derabanan, because if it only works in a rabbinic level, then how can you possibly allow rebate here between Jews, which is a doraita issue? Some people take out the word derabanan and think zechia works on a doraita level. Some people have other ways of answering it. I'm just going to leave this issue aside, though, because we'll never get through the daf. So now, that's his comparison. But this third answer doesn't work as well, because Veloki, Yisrael ate l'chal shlichut, akum lo ate l'chal shlichut. To say a katan has zechia and not shlichut, that works because ultimately the katan will become a Jew and will have shlichut. In other words, the katan will be able to be zochet on their own. But a Gentile never becomes a Jew. It's not like they're in a phase that's going to change. No, they're not in a phase that's going to change, unless, of course, they convert, which is actually going to be our next topic. But, right, we don't view a Gentile as if a Gentile is going to convert. And therefore, since they'll never come to shlichut, then maybe there is no zechia. And therefore, that's not a great answer. Tanu Rabbanan. We're going to have a lot today, by the way, of comparisons that then we're going to say, oh, that's not really a fair comparison. Those two things are not really equal. Tanu Rabbanan, but not yet. Now we're on a different topic. I told you we're going to get to converts. So let's say Yisrael shalavam ba'opin anochli. So a Jew borrows money from a Gentile. So the Gentile is the lender, biribit, with interest. So they have a document that says, right, Ruth borrowed money from Chris, $100, and the rebate is 20. Okay, that's our example. But then Zikafan alav b'milveh, Chris is going to convert to Judaism. The question is at what point, and what are they going to do either before or after the conversion, and what will be the halacha in each case. If they turned it all into one loan, meaning first there was a document that said Ruth borrowed $100 from Chris and is going to pay $20 in interest. Then they turned it into one loan, meaning they wrote an IOU that Ruth owes Chris $120 without mention of there being interest in that, even though Ruth never got $120 from Chris. It really is interest, but it now is all written as one loan. That's at least one explanation of what kafan alav b'milveh is. But we'll go with that explanation. So, and then Chris converts. So can Chris collect this $120 loan? Because it doesn't say it's a loan on interest, even though it really was originally. So it all depends on when this happened. If it was before the conversion, Chris, who's now Jewish, can now collect the entire thing because it just says Ruth owes me $120. But if you did that trick of moving it all into one document after the conversion, that's too late. Because when Chris was a Jew, he had this loan out with interest, and it said it was with interest. You can't change it at that point. It's too late to change. And now the exact reverse case. What if Chris was the borrower and Ruth was the lender? Exact same thing. If the Gentile borrowed money, Jew, with interest, and then turned it into this $120 IOU, and converts. If it all happened before the conversion, then no problem. Then you can pay the whole thing. But if it was once the conversion happened, then zakafan alav b'milveh, goveh keren ve'eno goveh ribit. Okay, then basically, if you didn't do anything until later, it's too late. Because when Chris converted, he had this loan out with interest. So then he can't collect the interest, right? Ruth can't collect the interest. Rabbi Yosi disagrees with this last halacha. Rabbi Yosi omer, Nohuish alava ma'om Yisrael beribit, ben kach uben kach goveh keren ve'goveh ribit. If this Gentile Chris converts, no matter what, Ruth gets to collect the ribit. Because, now, why because? We're going to have to figure out. Because if already before Chris converted, it wasn't anymore looking like ribit, why would she be able to collect the interest? To which Amarava, we're going to first say who we hold like, and then we're going to explain Rabbi Yosi. Amarava, Amarav, Chista, Amarav, Huna, Halakha, Ki Rabbi Yosi. We pass like Rabbi Yosi, and now Amarava, my time at the Rabbi Yosi, what's his reason? This is a fascinating line, and I think it can be explained in two ways. We don't want people to say that this guy converted to avoid paying ribit. Okay, so we don't want any sort of, now, this is a good question, whether this is, we're worried that a Gentile will convert to avoid ribit payments. Now you say, what, for the $20? But, we could be talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. It could be a huge savings, right? What people will do to avoid some taxes, right? We all know what people try to do to avoid that. And that's also, this is no different than, let's say, some taxes. So basically, we're going to say either, now there's two ways to read this line as far as I can tell. Either we don't want Gentiles converting to avoid paying interest, right? Because anytime you have a loan with a Jew, if you convert, well, then they won't be able to collect the interest. And, so comes Rabbi Yosi and he says, we're not allowing this. And that's, the approach of we're suspect of converts, right? Which we are very familiar with today. Let's say in Israel, where there's this suspicion that people are converting just to be able to live in Israel, get citizenship, right? Which, of course, is unfair to people who are converting fair and square, that everyone's going to, accuse them, which, you could see happening here as well, or being suspect of them. Or it's not really that they're doing it for that, but people will say, notice the words, Shelo yomru, so people won't say. And this is more like a problem of Ino Hager. We're worried about people mocking the convert, right? We're supposed to treat converts equally. Now, if we have something in our system that basically will lead people, it's almost like Lifnei Ver Lo Titei Machshol. We're putting a stumbling block in front of all these Jews, allowing them to have something to taunt the converts with, right? We don't want to allow that to happen, so we're going to actually make all of them have to return their loans on ribit if they had a loan before they converted, to avoid any sort of issues here. It's a very interesting line. Again, depends on how you read it, whether it's that we're suspicious or we just assume people will be suspicious and we'll say things about them and we want to avoid that. Tana Rabbanan, shtar shekatuv bo ribit. Now we have a good question. What if, now forget about Gentiles, we're talking about Jews, a Jew loans money to a Jew on interest. What happens now? So according to Rabbi Meir, this is such a problematic thing that we don't even allow you, if you loan me money on interest, I don't have to pay you back anything from a legal perspective, because that shtar is invalid. You weren't allowed to loan on interest, you did, tough luck, you don't get anything back. Divrei Rabbi Meir, Chachamim omrim, what do you mean? Goveh keren, you get back your $100. You just don't get the extra 20. What's the root of their machloket? Rabbi Meir savar kansina hetera mishum isura. Rabbi Meir says we can penalize you. It's a penalty. We can penalize you with something that's permitted on account of something that's forbidden. Because here you've mixed permitted, forbidden. Rabbanan savre lo kansina hetera mishum isura. The rabbis say no, we can't do that. We only penalize you for the forbidden part. You can't get the interest, but you can get the loan itself. Now, Tosfot raises a very interesting question. I don't spend too much time reading it so we don't finish the daf, but Tosfot basically says, I'll read it. If you look at, like, in my Gemara, it's the third wide line. It's a very long Tosfot here. Shtar sheyesh bo ribit. He says, wait a minute. How can you go collect that loan using this document? Because theoretically, or not theoretically, but actually, the witnesses signed on that document are false witnesses. Why are they not false witnesses? Disqualified witnesses. We haven't learned really in-depth disqualified witnesses, But one of the 6 machlokot between Abaye and Rava is disqualified witnesses. And specifically, okay, let's talk about it in general. Witnesses are generally disqualified if they're suspect of having taken money, for some reason, if they're thieves, because we're worried they're going to take money to lie falsely. Even if Abaye says, what if you eat non-kosher food because you're just angry, you don't want to keep halacha, not because it's cheaper to buy, McDonald's than it is to go to the kosher hamburger place, and you want to save yourself money, in which case maybe you're suspect of a money-related issue. But even if it's not a money-hungry issue, you're still not allowed to be a witness. So let's take these witnesses. The witnesses signed on a document with a loan. What did we learn? They went against lo tisimun alav neshech. They're part of the whole isur. They did something wrong, and according to Abaye, that would disqualify them from being witnesses. So there's a big problem here. How can you even collect that loan? Now, maybe you could collect it but you can't collect it from, let's say, nechassim mishuabadim, lien property, because the document is invalid. It has disqualified witnesses signed on it. But it seems like it's not a problem according to the rabbis. So Tosfot suggests some possibilities as to why. One of the answers is maybe this is only permitted in Ribit de Rabbanan, and then we get to a whole interesting thing which is in Ribit de Rabbanan, the whole Murachan ve'lo lahachis are not pasul, which would have all sorts of ramifications. That answer. The second option is to say that maybe Ribit de Oraita even you could do it, because this is a fascinating thing, and it relates a little to what we just talked about. What people think. People think that lo tisimun alav neshech really only applies to a milveh, and therefore the witnesses themselves don't even realize that they're doing something that's wrong. If they don't realize, then they're only shogegim. For someone who's shogeg and does it without realizing it's wrong, well, right, and what does that mean? It means that people weren't learning ezu neshech, right? So if you're thinking this parak is kind of complicated and hard to learn, probably people didn't learn it and didn't learn that the edim are also obligated, in which case the edim aren't bad people because they did something not really realizing it was wrong. That's another fascinating thing in and of itself. Okay, I'm going to get back to the daf, but I didn't want to ignore that tosfot because it's very, very interesting. So now we have another case of a shtar that's no good. There's a Mishna that says, shtarei chov hamukdamim psulim va'amuchalim kshirim. A shtar chov that was written with an early date. It says January, I loaned you the money, but I really only loaned you the money in February. Now, what's the problem with the shtar? When you go to collect, you lend me money, you go to collect the loan from my lien property, you can take it from anyone who I sold to from January. But it's not true, because you can only collect it from February. But based on this false document, you could collect from January. So comes the Mishna and says, this is disqualified. There's a debate what this means, disqualified. Does it mean you can't even get your loan back? Or does it mean you just can't collect your loan from lien property? Or right, there's a few different explanations of what exactly it means. But let's just call it's no good. If it's muchal, if you have a later date, it's fine, because it just means, well, you're only going to be able to collect your loan, let's say from March, even though you really theoretically could have collected from February, but it won't cause you to do something that's against the law. So the Gemara asks, Mukdamim amai psulim. But why? Why should this document be disqualified? And even if you say, let's say, it just means you can't collect from lien property. But what do you mean? Why can't you collect from lien property at least from February? In other words, it's not that the document is totally wrong. It says January. It's really February. How do we know February? Because there were witnesses that said, you loaned me the money actually in February. So, at least you should be able to collect from February. This makes it sound like you can't collect at all from lien property, and maybe not even the loan at all if you take it literally, take it to have the broader meaning. So Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish b'machloket shnuya Rabbi Meir, and this is exactly the same thing as us. This is actually a subject of debate. The Mishna just quotes Rabbi Meir's opinion, which is often common. The Mishna quotes Rabbi Meir's opinion, and Rabbi Meir says, "Konsim heter mishum isura," because you wrote this document with an early date, which could have allowed you to collect property from January, if correctly. Well, we're going to penalize you and not let you collect any lien property, even though theoretically by law you should be able to collect from February. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar, he has a different explanation. Afilu tema Rabbanan, he says you could even explain this Mishna. It's not a subject of debate. Even the rabbis would agree. Why? Because we don't want to allow you to collect it all, because maybe we'll make a mistake and people won't know that it was only from February and you'll collect from January, and therefore we're just going to disqualify any early early, predated loans. Gavra. Now we're going to have a story, a blackmail story. And from here, we're going to get into something similar about a document that has something problematic in it, right? We had a document that had rebate in it. We had a document with an early date. Now we're going to have a different kind of document, and then we're going to compare it to previous things we saw and to some other things. Like I said, we're going to have a lot of comparisons and then say, not really a fair comparison. So it's a funny, interesting story here. Okay, let's take you and me in this story. I loan you money, you give me your field as collateral. Okay, this is an actual story that happened. You gave me your field as collateral. I lived in that property for 3 years, okay, because you gave it to me as collateral. That's totally fair and square, but we're going to learn something. In Bava Batra, we're going to learn that if I live in a field for 3 years, I can claim ownership over it. Now, in this case, I can't because it was not mine. But generally, I can claim ownership over something after 3 years. Why? Because we assume that if you haven't complained, if I'm sitting in your field, let's say I go and sit in your field for 3 years and eat fruits and take all the produce and you don't say anything, we assume after 3 years it must be mine. Now, what's the issue here? Usually what it means is I probably bought the field and I lost the document. Mice ate it up or something else happened. I lost it. After 3 years, I don't have to produce an original document. All I have to produce is I've been living here and you've never complained. Now, in a collateral, we're going to learn something else, which is when I take your field as collateral, I have a document that says, on account of this loan, I received this property as collateral. You don't have any proof. So your job is, if you're smart or on top of things, while I'm taking produce of that land for all this time, you at least have to make a comment every once in a while so that people see in front of witnesses that you're saying, by the way, she's living in my land. And if you don't do that, the following thing can happen. And this guy didn't do that, okay? You in this story didn't do that. And as a result, I come and blackmail you. And I say the following. I've lived here for 3 years, no one's complained, which means I can just go to court and claim this is my own land. So I basically blackmail you and say the following. Listen, I want to buy this land, I say to you. If you sell it to me, great. I'll pay you fair and square. Be low, and if not, I'm going to destroy, hide, put it away, that shtar mashkanta. No one will ever find it. And I'll just claim that I bought it. And then you won't get anything. So you may as well sell it to me. Now, you're feeling blackmailed. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to come up with your own system. So this guy was very smart, even though it wasn't smart enough to claim, make an open statement. Michelle's living in my land as, it's my land and she's just there because it's collateral. But not smart enough to do that, but now that they're stuck in a situation, the guy gets smart. Okay, you in the story, what do? You give it as a gift, this land, to your son, your minor son, and then you sell it to me. So I want to buy it. I'll sell it to you. But before you sell it, you give up your rights, and it's now in your son's name. So now you can't sell it because it's not yours. Now, but when you sell land, if you're a member, you always sell it with a guarantee. So now what happened? You sold it with a guarantee. Now, if you sell with a guarantee, and I have a document to show for it, anytime you have a document, right? So you sold me the land. Now, in the end, what's going to happen? They're going to, okay, the zvina vadailo zvina. The court's going to come, right? The child's going to come and say, hey, that land's mine. And the court's going to take it away from me. But I get my money back. But what if you don't have money? Can I go collect it from other land of yours? And can I seize property of yours? Now we have a contract between us that says it was sold with achrayu, with the guarantee. I should be able to get your property. But what's the problem? It's a false document. It wasn't even a relevant document in the first place. You were selling me land that wasn't yours. I could just go to the court and say, I'm selling you my neighbor's property. Of course, it's an irrelevant document. So that's the question of the Gemara. Zuze, the money that you now owe me because I gave you money and now I should at least get my money back. Is it kimilva b'shtar dami? Is it like it's written in a shtar and I can therefore collect it from lien property? Or maybe it's like an oral agreement because it wasn't really a document. We can't collect it from lien property. So Amar Rabbi Asi, wait a minute, isn't this exactly what Rabbi Asi says? The Amar Rabbi Asi, moving out of Amabed, Modeh v'shtar shekatvu, ein sarich l'kaimo. if we have a document, something else, a valid document, and I want to collect from Nechasim Shobadim. Let's say it's a document of a loan, and you don't pay me the money back, and I want to go collect it from your lien property. Now, again, this is a distinction that we've talked about many times, but maybe it's worth repeating. If it's an oral agreement, I loaned you money with just witnesses, no written down, I can't collect it from lien property. But if it has a document, well, then when the borrower sold land to people, they should have checked that there was something on record. They should know that it's liened, and therefore maybe they got it for a better price. And then I can go collect it from anyone who bought the land from me. So I can collect it from lien property. So he says, but that's only if the shtar is mikuyan, if we checked out, the witnesses are valid and all that. But if let's say it's a loan between me and you, I loaned you money, and you admit that this was a loan between you and me, as long as you admit it was a document that was valid, right? You admit that you wrote it, you admit you wrote that document, then you don't even need the kaimo and gobem nechasim shobadim. I can already collect it from lien property. So same thing here. You admit you wrote this sale, this deed of sale. You don't deny that. So you admit that you sold me this land with achrayut, but not really, because you admit you wrote something that has no validity, and that's what they're going to answer. And then, on the basis of this, they tried to say, oh, well, then I should be able to get my money back with land. I'm like, Rabbi Midavi, these are not the same. Hadran nitan likatev. That was a document that could have been written. It was a valid document. Hacha lo nitan likatev. And that was what we're going to talk about right now. A document that couldn't have even been written in the first place. You can't write a document to sell me something that's not yours. So therefore, you can't compare, and therefore seems like I shouldn't be able to collect. I should only be able to get my money back. If I can't get my money back because you have no money, I can't get it from lien property. Yativ Mereimar v'kamar lahashmata. Now, Mereimar sat and said this thing about if it's lo nitan likatev, then it's basically not a document. Amalei Ravina l'Rameimar. Ravina says to Mereimar, but wait. Elahad Amar Rabbi Yochanan zera shema yigbe mizman rishon. Let's go back to our shtar mukdam. What did Rabbi Yochanan say? Even the rabbis will agree that it's not a good shtar. Why? Well, not because it's a shtar that never should have been written because the date was wrong, but he said, we're worried that maybe you'll collect from the early date. Maybe you'll seize property against the law, and therefore we don't allow it. Neima, why didn't you just say lo nitan likatev? If you write that the loan was in June or January and it was only in February, well, that was a false document. You shouldn't have written that. Is that the same or not the same? Not really the same, and that's what they're going to say. So Amarle, Mereimar says back to him, Hachi asked her what? You're comparing it to different things. Hatam nihi delon nitan likatev bizman rishon, aval nitan likatev bizman sheni. There really was a loan. It just, right, what's the main part of a document of an IOU? It's the IOU part. That was true. It was just the date was off. That's not the same thing. This, but this was a document where you sold something that wasn't even yours to sell. So that's a totally different story. Okay, let's try to find something more similar. Okay, there's a Mishna that says, and we learned this already a few times in Yitin and Tikkun Olam, we learned it in Bava Kama. You can't collect the shevach, the investment in the land. We're going to explain in 1 minute what we're talking about, because right now we don't understand, from lien property because of Tikkun Olam. So now they say, what's the case? Oh, now this is going to be similar. You steal a field from someone else. Okay, so you stole a field, and you sell it to me. Now, I invest in the field, I invest in the field, and then the person you stole it from comes and collects it from me. Now, you wrote me a document guaranteeing the sale. So what happens? The person who was robbed seizes the field from me. So I'm left with nothing. I go back to you because you sold me the field with achrayut, with guarantee. I go back to you and I try to get my money back. So what do I want to get back though? Not only the money that I spent on the sale, also the money I invested. So really what only concerns us, even though we started with Shevach Karkaot, it's not really my investment money. That's more for that sugya. For our sugya, this is the important part. When I go and get the money back from you, because we had a document, now remember, it was a document Shaloni Tani Katev. You sold me land that was stolen. It wasn't yours. So you sold me land with a document. With that document, I can go back and say, hey, they seized the property. I want my money back. And if you don't have money, I can get the money. I paid you for that land. I can get it back from lien property. That's the problem, because that means the shtar is valid, even though that was a document. You couldn't have written it. It wasn't your land to sell. And the shevach, the fact that I invested $200 in the land in the meantime, that I can go back only from nechasim b'nei, only from cash you have on hand. But anyway, the first part, why don't you say this could have been written? I can't get anything back from nechasim b'shobadim. It was all a fake, just like our case, right? The blackmail case. Well, no, hachi hashta, still they're different. Why are they different? Hatan ilaman damar nichano deloni krei gazlana. Ilaman damar lichon ledeleko be'amnute mefaisa lemari mokim ledishtar. In that case, you might remember we learned this. In the end, that document is viewed as somewhat valid. Why is it somewhat valid? Because after you sell me the field, one of the first things on your agenda is going to be to go to the person you stole from and try to convince them to sell you that piece of land, because there's an assumption that the guy's going to, it's land. This isn't like I stole your TV and you'll never figure out, or I stole your car and you might never find it because it'll be broken into parts. This is land. You're going to, the person who was robbed is going to eventually come back to their land and claim it was theirs and take it away from me. So you're going to basically try at this point to get it bought from the person who you stole it from, and in order to establish it in my name. Why? Either because you don't want me to call you a thief, or because you want to be viewed as an honest person. They sound very similar. If you might remember when we learned this last time, we had enough demeanor between them, but I'm not going to get into that now. So now, that is a case where when you wrote the shtar, it's true it wasn't yours to write, but you at least had intent. Now, what happened was, it was true, you didn't do it in time, but you did have intent to make that land become mine. But in the case of the blackmail, your whole point was, the whole point was you didn't want me to keep the land. You were trying to get me off the land. So that's why shtar makayim la, what we're going to say the shtar is a good shtar? Of course not. Okay, and that's why, again, the whole thing was to say, when I want to get back my money from the deal, which I am supposed to get back, I can only get it in cash. If you don't have cash, I can't take it from lien property. Now we're going to move on to a Mishna, which talks all about things we've been mentioning up until now, and now we see it in the Mishna, which is this concept of paying for something up front and only getting the produce later, which again looks like a loan with rebate, because I'm giving you money. After a time, you're going to give me back produce, and it's possible, and even maybe likely, because we set according to the price at the beginning of the season, which was low, I might get more for my money. Okay, it could be at this point I get 4 for my money. At that point, I'll get 3, but you're going to give me 4 because we locked in at this early price. So I'm going to end up with more. So now, ein poskim al perot. When are we allowed to do this? You can't do this. Poskim al perot means that the buyer sets the price with the seller. Okay, the buyer is the one who's always posek. The buyer agrees with the seller, it makes the seller commit that you're going to lock in at this rate and give me the produce later at this higher rate. The buyer in this case is going to be the one who's going to theoretically be getting the interest, because they give money and they get back more. Ad sheyitzeh hashar. Well, you can't do it until there's a set rate. Yatsa hashar poskim. Once there's a set rate, you can. Okay, we're going to see there's 2 factors really that are important. They're saying 1, but 1 is really 2, and you'll see why. The real issue is that this will work in a case, and this is the basis for this halacha. It will work if you have that stuff on hand when I give you the money. So I'm buying wheat from you. I give you money up front, you're going to give it to me in 6 months. At the rate that it is now, even if the rate goes up, I'm going to get the same amount, and possibly I'll get something at a higher value. It's okay in the case where you have wheat on hand right now. If you have wheat on hand, it's as if I'm getting the wheat immediately. And therefore, we can lock in at that rate because you have it on hand. Even if you don't have it on hand, if there's a fixed rate and I give you money, then it's as if you have it. Because at that point, when there's a fixed rate, you can go anywhere to any store at that moment and buy the wheat. So it's as if you have the wheat. That's the whole idea of the shar. Once the shar is set, it's as if you have the item, because you're theoretical, again, you can't always have it if you don't have money, but I just gave you money. So at the moment I give you the money, you can take that money and go buy the wheat for exactly the price we said. So it's as if you have it on hand. That's basically how this works. And that's what it means. Even though you don't have, other people have, and you can go buy it right then and there for that price because that's the price. And even though the price might go up later, it doesn't matter because it's as if you gave it to me right now, even though you didn't, even though you don't even have it. But since you could get it, and therefore it's as if you do have it, and therefore it's as if you gave it to me right then, and you committed that to me right now. It's like what we said about akin samaftech. I have it in my storehouse, I just have to find the key, right? It's the same idea. That's all yeshla. Let's say, okay, this is an early stage. You were the first one to harvest your crops, okay, your wheat. If I have a pile, you have a pile of grains right now, okay? It's unfinished. It's not wheat. It's not anything yet. It hasn't gone through a bunch of processes. But you say to me, I give you money, and you're going to commit to me that whatever flour is produced from this actual pile will be mine. We can lock into a rate because that's yeshlo, even though it's not a finished product, and even though there's no rate, because remember, the rate is only allows you even if ain low. It's as if yeshlo. But without a rate, if you still have it on hand, it's fine. So here, you don't have the flour, but you do have the raw materials, okay, at the beginning. Same thing with alabit shel anavim, ala ma'atan shel zeitim, ala bitzim shel yotzer, ala simin shel shavo b'kibshan. Okay, this is the you're buying wine when the guy just has the grapes in the basket, or the oil when the olives are just in a vat, or the clumps of clay before you've made your pots, and I'm buying pots, or the limestone when it's not actually ready yet. Okay, it's sunk into the kibshan, but it's not yet ready. And so again, you have something actually, but it's not ready yet, but it's enough to say you have it. Zevel, you could do all, okay, when it comes to fertilizer, you could do it any time of year because it's always readily available. Rabbi, and you can always get it, I guess, for any kind of price. It's easily accessible for cheap. Rabbi Yosi Omer, Rabbi Yosi says, no, you have to have on hand. Chachamim Mitirim, they say it's okay. Next thing, uposekimo b'shar hagavoah. This is a little tricky. Shar hagavoah really means shar namuch. Okay, why is it called shar hagavoah? Shar hagavoah means a high rate. It doesn't mean high rate like a high. If I want, when I'm buying this, I give you the money up front. Now, I'm hoping to win out. I'm hoping the price will go up. What if the price goes down? I lose because we clicked it, we locked into this price. But what's interesting is I haven't really given you, all I've given you is money and I haven't taken the fruits. So there's no kinyan yet. Remember, when it's fruits, unless I'm moshech, it's not really mine. So comes the Mishna and says, listen, I can make, if I want, I can make an arrangement with you, only if I made this arrangement, that if the price drops, you're going to give me more. You're going to give me this price now. I'm not going to lose on the deal, but I'd have to make that arrangement with you. But I can make that arrangement that we're locking into this price, meaning if it goes up, it won't be repeated and I will get more. But if it goes down, you're actually going to provide me with the amount we committed and not with less. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, because I really haven't done a kinyan yet, comes Rabbi Yehuda and says, if we didn't lock in at that price, and if I didn't have you commit that if the price goes down, you're going to compensate me, I can say to you, either compensate me or I'm pulling my money. I want my money back. And I can get it back. And there's no misha para, like I'm looking bad, because I'm protected as the buyer here. And that's because there was no actual kinyan here. Okay, the Gemara starts off with a statement that seemingly contradicts the Mishnah. We're going to have to deal with that. I'm Rabbi Asi, I'm Rabbi Yochanan, and puskim ala shar shebashuk. You can't pay up front for the rate in the shuk. Okay, that's weird. That's what the Gemara said. You can't be posek when there's no rate. When there's a rate, you can. Okay, hold on. I'm going to Rabbi Zera, the Rabbi Asi. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Afilu kedormus hazeh. Did Rabbi Yochanan even talk about like in dormus where there's a very set rate, big city shuk? They said, no. He was only talking about little villages where there's a rate, but it's not a set rate. It changes all the time because it's a very small shuk. Now, the one who thought in the beginning when they said, to honor Rabbi Yosi, this is Rabbi Zera, that Rabbi Yosi said, even in the big city, how How did Rabbi Meir even think that Rabbi Yochanan said that in a big shul when there's a set rate? Doesn't the Mishna say there's a set rate? You can do it. So they say, what was he thinking? He thought that he thought that it was talking about when they unload all the stuff from the boats or from the houses where they're keeping everything, the storage houses. That's when the Shiur becomes so clear. That's what he thought. In other words, we're going to say there's 3 gradations. There's no Shiur or a Shiur. There's no Shiur at all. There's 4, right? There's no rate. Of course, you can't do it. There's a rate in the village, which is going to change all the time. That also you can't do. There's a rate in a market that you can do. But Rabbi Meir, who thought that Rabbi Yochanan wasn't talking about that, thought that maybe Rabbi Yochanan says only when the rate is in, let's say, a big city, and it's right after they just flooded the market with tons of stuff. At that point, tons of items. At that point, this rate is going to be really set. And that's what he thought the Mishna meant. But no, in fact, the Mishna meant also kedormos, like even in a big city, even without the influx of tons of inventory. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, that's like our Mishnah, but then it starts talking about unique cases. We're going to talk about 2 different things. Maybe I'll start with what they are. The first is new grains and old grain. New grains are not as good because they're not dry yet, and you can't make flour out of moist ones, only dry ones. But they will eventually become dry. Okay, so let's start with that one first. If there are new ones selling 4 for a shekel, or 4 for $1, and old ones at 3 for $1, and poskim, right, because the old ones are more expensive, you can't be poskim. Now, what they mean here is on the old ones for the lower rate. You can't sell old ones for the low rate of the new ones because the new ones will become old. It's as if ain low, because even though if you click into this rate, I give you the price 4 for 1, so I give you $1 to get 4, but I'm giving you for the new ones, which are really 3. We can't lock in at that price because when you give me new ones at 3, it could be by that point everything is worth 3, 3 for $1, and therefore I'm getting more for my money because eventually what will happen? The prices are the same, and you won't be able to anymore get 4 for $1. So I'm going to get 4. Right? Sorry, I think I said something wrong. I'm going to get, if we lock in at 4 for $1, I'm going to get 4 no matter what, but it's not really like Yeshlo, because you might not be able to find 4 for $1 later, and then you're really giving me 4 for $1 actually more, because 3 go for $1 now, and I'm getting more than that, and then that will be rebeat. And likewise, it's a little bit different though. The poor people collect stuff, and right, the matanot laniyim, and they theoretically could sell it. Now, that's not as good as selling in a store. Why? Because they collect from all different fields. And also, right, number one, it's not the same. There's no consistency within the stuff. And also, we're going to see later, maybe it's also poor quality. So theirs always goes for cheaper. And l'chol adam mishalosh. You can buy in a supermarket or a fruit store for 3. Unless they have the same rate, you again can't buy the stuff in the store for the rate of the poor people, unless they end up with the same rate, and then you can lock in at that rate. So on Rav Nachman, he says, but you can buy the cheap stuff for the cheap price. That's okay. You just can't buy the expensive stuff for the cheap price because you might not be able to find expensive stuff for cheap. So then, Amalei Rav Nachman, Mishna locate. Well, if the locate, you just said Rav Nachman that the poor people can always go buy from another poor person. So even if they don't have, it's as if they will have, right? They could buy. So lately, if he doesn't have, Yasif Milakot Kavri, he'll go find a friend like him and buy from him. Balabayit Nami, Yasif Milakot. But a Balabayit, right? This isn't the same as the old and the new, where there's an actual difference between them. If you're a shopkeeper and you clicked into this low rate, so you can always find to buy the low rate from the poor people. You'll buy there and you'll provide that, and then again, it won't be repeat, because you're providing something that you got. It's as if you have at that rate. To which they say, the balabayit, the store owner or the homeowner, is not going to humiliate themselves to go buy from poor people. That would be humiliating. They just won't do that, and therefore it's like ain low. He doesn't have produce at that rate, so you can't click into a rate that you don't have produce at that rate or ability to buy produce at that rate. Or alternatively, and this anyone who shops at a fancy fruit store, justifies it by believing this, whether it's true or not, good question. If you buy it from a fancy store, right, you're planning to get better produce. So that person can't say, oh, yeshli, because I go buy from the poor people, because their produce is lesser quality. Okay, right? Which, again, question whether it really is, really isn't. Some fruit stores claim to have higher prices, making people believe their produce is actually better, where really it's not necessarily better. But we all know there's fruit stores which do really have superior quality, and you're really getting more for your money, in which case it's not yeshlo. They can't always take the money that they got, the low rate, and buy the same amount of fruits for that low rate, because the low rate fruits are actually poorer in quality. Last thing for today. Amar Rav Sheshet and Amar Rav Huna. Ein lovin al shar shebashuk. I can't give you a loan. Now we're back to loans, not business. I can't lend you $100 and get back and make a stipulation from the beginning. You're going to give me $100 worth of wheat at today's price. Okay, because again, that will go up. If that I gave you money and you're giving me, okay, in a sale maybe, but not in a loan. Okay, so Rabbi Yosi, or some people say it was Rabbi Yosi, or Rav Sheshet. Did he really say this? We know that they asked Rav Huna this question. He actually answered the other way. They asked him, how did they Rav? These Talmidei Chachamim, these rabbis, they loan out money in Tishrei at the beginning of the season, and people give them produce at the end of the season in produce. They give money, they get back produce, and at the rate of Tishrei. So how do they do that? That's exactly what we said. So they asked, Shari al-Asur, is it permitted or forbidden? Amar lahu, it's permitted. Why is it permitted? He says to them, again, against what he just said. Ha chita b'hine, ha chita b'shili. Because even later on, and this is also, you can always find a cheaper price. Even if the prices go up in Tevet, there's always markets that sell it for cheaper. So they can always get it for that cheaper rate if they want, and therefore they can return it even though the rate goes up and it looks like we beat. No, it's always fine. They can always go buy it for that cheaper rate and actually return produce that's there, because you can always find it somewhere. So they say, how did Rav Huna contradicted himself? To which they answer me, Rav Huna ein lovin, kevan deshamaleh, had Amar Rav Shmuel Barchia, Amar Rabbi Elazar, lovin, Amar Iunami lovin. Rav Huna first thought, and this is a very interesting way to end, Rav Huna first thought you can't, and then he heard someone say you can, and then he permitted it. And here I think is a really big important thing. And this is where you see, and you can also listen to it in Alana Stein-Haynes. Her whole book is called Circumventing the Law. And this is where you see circumvention of the law at its best, right? They wanted to try to figure out ways to allow people to do business. So they said, well, if someone says it's okay, then I'm going to switch my position. And there's an interest here in the rabbis of trying to come up with situations like Heter Itzka and how we can do these things in a permitted way. Tomorrow at the complicated daf, we're going to see all sorts of different cases where they allow this. Okay, let's try to do a quick review. We finished up with the third answer to that problem with the shlichut of the nochri. Then we moved on to someone who converts, and if we switch the loan, zakifa lamal, right, to one big loan, we took the interest in all that. When was it allowed? When was it not? Then we talked about can you collect a loan that was on interest, at least the loan part, or we consimolcha? That was Rabbi Meir. And then we started comparing all sorts of cases where we say, is the shtar invalid or not? We had all these comparisons, and then we got into this thing about poskim al perot and when it's allowed, when it's not. When is it considered you have, even though you don't necessarily have? With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and B'sorot and a Chodesh Tov.